This really hasn't been easy. It's been one of the hardest things I've tried to do in my life. I actually stand up for myself, talk to people, share this out, and hopefully not be hated. Not something I've ever done before. I'm Lito, or Carlos Fernandez from the bands Shoebill and the Screaming 20s. Also husband of Delilah Lemons of Izanami and Lemons Records. I'm going to be telling you guys a story. A story about my very first girlfriend, the first person I've ever kissed, which turned out to be one of the most abusive and toxic people I've ever met in my life. Her name is Alice Smith, and she would take advantage of my hopeless romantic and inexperienced 18-year-old self and use him for attention and for pleasure, all in the efforts to make her ex-boyfriend jealous. And then not only continue to use me, but also berate me with verbal abuse, body shaming, and commands that I kill myself. Now, as terrible as all that is, it's not enough to make this video. But with months past after breaking up and myself having moved on to better myself and being engaged and soon to be married, Alice would start spreading rumors that I forcibly penetrated her when we were dating, despite the fact that we never had sex. Repainting our relationship so she doesn't come off as the villain, because she felt like I was to blame for her loss of friends, and because she could not deal with the guilt of what she did to me. And anytime I or my wife would come out about her lies publicly, she and her friends Rayan and Benet would attempt to silence us using their popularity and attacking us and any bands or venues that might associate with us. But they don't seek any justice. They only want to avoid being exposed. But that has gone long enough, and not only will it not let someone so abusive ruin my life, I'm not going to just stand by and let someone use a terrible crime and paint a slander an ex's name just because they're bitter, delegitimizing the struggle of true victims seeking justice and healing. As I said before, Alice was my very first girlfriend, her being the only person I dated besides Delilah. Before Alice, I had a very passionate view on relationships. I was obsessed with the classic romanticism and growth as a person. I always dreamed that my first girlfriend would be, if not my future wife, someone who I'd always appreciate having met, and hopefully still remain friends for my whole life. I carried this sentiment into our relationship. We met in February 2017. She was 17, and I was 18. She was a friend of my drummer at the time, Godfrey. I reached out to her when she started posting very depressive and suicidal captions on Instagram. And I would do this forever when I saw exhibiting this behavior. Because as someone who struggled with suicide and spent time in a mental institution myself, I saw her as a fellow human being in need of help. After talking through her issues, those being her most recent abusive ex and past others, we started working together to help her grow more independent. And from our friendship and even our romantic relationship, that was a goal that I always held throughout the entire time. And when our relationship eventually would become romantic, we would start dating in March. Now, as a first-time boyfriend, I was very nervous and very scared to mess anything up. So everything was very, high schooly. It was pretty vanilla. We went on movie dates and mall dates, mainly hung out in her room and played video games. And like I said, I was very nervous and inexperienced. So sexually, I was very careful and slow and very thoughtful. I told her I didn't want to have sex, and I didn't, until it felt right. But it never did. We did engage in cunnilingus and fingering in her room with the door open, and with her racist father who did not like me because I was Mexican downstairs. I wanted to make sure everything we did was what she wanted, asking for consent before doing anything, stopping in the middle and asking if it was okay then, and then even afterwards, to be sure nothing was wrong, I would ask her. Now, the only time we tried having me receive anything was extremely uncomfortable and even painful for me, as we had we'd attempt penetration, and my anxiety and comfortability would cause me to feel nothing but sharp pain and numbness. I would apologize for my failure to penetrate her, and while she said it was okay at first, she would go on to shame me for not being able to have sex with her, making fun of me to her friends and anyone else who would listen. Other than the sexual nature of our relationship, her disregard for me and my feelings would become more and more apparent. Texting her ex while we were dating, and only talking to me when she wanted to rant about her problems, but never listening to mine. These are red flags that were there from the beginning, but I was too inexperienced to see them. Alice never knew how to actually care for another person. Maybe she was so used to being used and abused by exes and her parents that she could not treat any other way. Or maybe she was a born sociopath, I really don't know. Either way, every aspect of her relationships in some way or another were for personal gain. Both her friendships and her romantic relationships. Alice would convince me to let her talk to her ex while we were dating because she told me she needed friends. And I wanted her to be happy, so I didn't question it. I trusted her. Now, to the surprise of no one, she would leave me for that same ex, not soon after. Initially telling me that she was leaving me to better herself as a person and learn how to be alone more. And the good-natured fool in me believed her. I was happy for her. I believed she was really trying to become independent and grow as a person. And that's, like I said, all I wanted for her. And for a while, I had the perfect breakup. We even kissed goodbye. But it wouldn't take long for the truth to come out. And while for the first week, it was nothing but anger and, mean words from her side and me being mad, specifically because I was really disgusted that she would go back to her ex, specifically because the type of man she described him to be was very disgusting, very forceful and abusive. So it really bothered me that she would go back to him. I thought, like I said, all I wanted for her was her to grow as a person, and I thought that was regressing. Though eventually, for the sake of our friendship and because I did care for her and I wanted to remain in touch, I conceded. The next months or so would be some of the sadder ones, some of the more pathetic ones, more embarrassing. While we were dating, I promised to help her with her schoolwork, to help her pass, to help her graduate. And so, for weeks, I would spend hours and hours doing my ex's homework for her online at Apex classes. This while also paying for her rides to her boyfriend's house and giving her any attention she needed through text. And she would text me a disturbingly large amount, though I guess that was a known trait of hers. It was the day that I was no longer useful to her when she turned against me again. She failed to graduate despite my help, and so what would follow was weeks of verbal abuse, body shaming, and threats. She would tell me how much of a worthless person I am. All that she wanted from me was to make her boyfriend jealous and to have sex, though I could not deliver on that. She would call me names like pussy and baby dick because I couldn't penetrate her that one day, and telling me that I have no worth and that I should kill myself. This despite knowing my past with suicide and mental illness. The last day we would talk for a long while would be during a house show, where while in the pit, her boyfriend would come up from behind and punch me in the back of the head while I was in the pit. After turning around, I would duck under a punch and tackle my assailant to the ground. And I would hold him there in a headlock until everyone came and broke up the fight. This is where again, Alice would come to me, screaming to me how much of a worthless person I am and how much I should just kill myself. She did that there in public in front of everybody there at the show, showing everybody what kind of person she was. With mostly no noise after that, it would be months, and I'd be then dating and engaged to my wife, Delilah Lemons. This is when I began to hear of Alice, that Alice was spreading rumors that I was aggressive when we were dating. While I was disturbed, because obviously it was beyond the truth, I also expected this from her. This is exactly what she would say about her exes. Though surely I would hear her description get more and more worse. Descriptions would then morph into forceful and abusive. Then eventually she'd start telling shared friends of ours or strangers that I was her rapist. The moment I found out, I immediately went online to speak out against her. Though I was beyond mentally anguished and terrified that she would stoop so low to lie about this, so I struggled to really handle the situation well. But over the course of the next few months, her and her friends, Rayan and Benet, would use their popularity as e-girls and artists to attack me, my wife, and anyone else coming out against Alice's lie. They would hit up venues and post cropped out and contextless text as proof. Text specifically of me or any friends trying to reach out to them and explain my innocence. And even despite me telling Benet that I never had sex ever, let alone with Alice, they would persist, telling different stories from each other or none at all. But it's Alice who claims that day where we tried penetration, when I was too anxious and scared and hurt to do so, was the day where I forcibly penetrated her. She claims that on that day, I put my shirt over my own head and then forced her to give me a blowjob, then proceeded to grab a condom and have unconsensual penetrative sex. The same woman who shamed me for not having sex with her that day was claiming that I raped her, and she is now only coming out about it because she claims that she didn't want to ruin my life at first. Though her constant personal abuse and her telling me to commit suicide to my face in public suggests otherwise. Now, despite the ridiculousness of the fact that she claims that I put my shirt over my face before forcing myself on her, I did in fact have my shirt over my head. But this is because Alice, being similarly inexperienced as me, was embarrassed and insecure in her abilities to give me a hand job and blowjob. That being the same day where we tried penetration. So she asked me not to look at her as we tried. To ensure my girlfriend felt as comfortable as possible, I covered my face with my shirt. Now, another reason I was hesitant to be touched sexually all this time, and only really our sexual relationship was mainly her receiving and not me, was because at the time it was revealed to me that I very much could have been sexually abused as a child. This was brought up to me by a friend that went through the ordeal of child sexual abuse herself. This led the whole experience with Alice that day to be extremely uncomfortable, especially due to the fact that my face was covered, which contributed to my anxiety and the pain that I felt. She also explicitly states that I went and got a condom and also had it on. This lie is relevant because of the fact that I was condomless. It contributed to the pain and to the anxiety that I felt. Because now not only was I worried as to why it was hurting, but I also thought we were at risk for pregnancy, making the whole thing undesirable and making me wish that it could stop even before it began. She also claims that I took pictures of her after the event. While obviously it's not true because the event did not only not happen, but because I had a huge amount of respect for Alice's sexual privacy, and any pictures that she sent me were immediately deleted from my photo storage. And even Jacob can vouch for me, as he deleted any trace from her from my cloud storage to save me the trouble of doing it myself. I respected her sexual privacy, something that she never did for me, even after breaking up. I would like to point out that my wife can attest to this feeling of anxiety and in pain that I experienced that day, as it made it very difficult when we first attempted to have sex. In fact, it took 3 attempts until I was finally able to feel comfortable enough to do it. She can also vouch for my respect for consent, as I treated her the exact same way as I treated Alice in terms of our sexual relationship. She is my best friend, the love of my life, someone who I respect and look up to, as she is the one who made me the man I am today. Keep in mind that I dated my wife, Delilah, only months after Alice, with no one in between, meaning my treatment of my partner from my very first girlfriend then on to the second, that being my wife, has little to no change at all. And so if the claims are to be believed, not only should my wife have been the first one to reach out to protect, which she wasn't, but her word should be held at the highest esteem. But instead, she is mocked and attacked and slandered. Delilah, a woman to be respected as any other, is told by Alice and her compatriots that her views and experience don't matter and that she should be silent, disregarding all of her pain that she's experienced in this sexually oppressive culture. In the most recent of attacks, that starting in June 2020, Alice and her friends Rayan and Benet would claim to always have hard proof, so undeniable that they shamed anyone who didn't believe or question it, or even get the chance to hear it at most times, because most of the time they would state that they'll send proof but never actually do it, and then shame the person for not believing them. But given the few times that they send anything at all or post online, one could expect for them text messages cropped out or just given a narrative that they made up to fit their agenda. And funnily enough, reading the full text that they sometimes send in full blatantly contradicts what they're trying to claim. So all in all, they don't have any proof at all. It's like no evidence but they're selling it like it's hard, cold proof. That's how stupid this is. For example, one of the proofs that they put out there is a screenshot, usually cropped, of a conversation between my best friend and basically brother, Jacob Arambula, and Rayan. Now, these texts happened in November of 2019, but Alice, for some reason, is claiming that they happened in June, in the morning. I don't know why. In these cropped out texts, Jacob can be seen to have said that calling me a molester would be a better rumor than what they are saying. Then goes on to explain how even that statement doesn't make sense. And this is in the cropped out version. Now, before I show the rest of the text that they're hiding, I want to point out that Alice isn't even claiming that I molested her. In fact, she even stated to my friend where she says that all oral and fingering was consensual. So I don't understand why they're even trying to cling to the statement when it contradicts their own story. But either way, let's still just show the rest of the text and show what's going on. Now, when Jacob made this statement, it was obviously hypothetical. As you could see in the up-cropped portion of the text, it was following him explaining that I did not have unconsensual sex with Alice. In fact, I never had sex with her. This is what he tells Rayan, since sex meant a lot to me as a Christian, which it does, and that I cared for Alice, which I did. Now, Jacob at the time was on LSD. So this wasn't really a conversation he should be having in the first place, as he was not mentally fit for it. But he was engaged in it still. So, in his head, he knew I was a virgin, and he knew I didn't have sex. And in his attempt to really reach out to him, he made the hypothetical statement that, at most, they could claim our cunnilingus and fingering was unconsensual, which they don't claim that. So, I don't really see the point of all that. Now, this very much is not the best way to talk to individuals only interested in ruining my reputation, but like I said, he was high. And even so, Alice herself confirms that all of our oral and fingering was consensual. So everything instead that was posted about this is basically pointless. But regardless, Alice and her friends are attempting to recontextualize the photo and either hide the other messages or contradict their narrative, or send it whole and hope that no one actually bothers to read it. This tactic would be used again to recontextualize a string of texts that I had with Benet. She was the first one to make the false accusations public, posting on her Instagram and Twitter sometime in fall of 2019. I reached out to her, trying to tell her the truth of the matter, pleading for her to hear me out, specifically telling the details of the situation, like the fact that Alice and I did not have sex and how she used and abused me. She would ignore my every word, adamant to keep publicly slandering me. I would attempt to explain to her that it's extremely irresponsible and harmful to publicly accuse someone of such heinous crimes when she literally has no proof herself, or can provide any to anyone else. This is when she shot back that she did not need proof, arguing that there are plenty of rape cases that happen when there's no proof at all. I understand this is something that sadly is true, but in this case, it is them taking advantage of the difficulty many face when they attempt to prosecute rapists to validate their spreading of false and maliciously motivated lies. I would then try to make her understand what she was doing by giving her a comparable hypothetical scenario, which in hindsight was a terrible idea given the past use of hypotheticals with this group. I try to show her that I could easily accuse her of something just as terrible, like being a pedophile and having a 16-year-old friend vouch for me. This is show her exactly how damaging these false claims could be and how baseless an accusation that they're making is. Because at that point, I still believe Benet was someone who really cared about doing something good and just did not know that Alice was lying. But in the end, she'd be just as conniving as her friends. She'd post screenshots claiming that I was threatening to spread rumors about her, willingly ignoring our whole conversation. I've also seen texts of them claiming that they have proof of me admitting that I'm an abuser, though I have not seen any of that, like anything close to that, which makes me to believe that they are claiming that these texts right here with Benet are the ones that I claim to admit it, even though throughout these entire texts with her, I do nothing but, provide proof of my innocence, defending my innocence. There's another twisting of the truth on their part in an attempt to paint me as a criminal who smugly states that they have no proof, so there's nothing they can do. Basically, they're demonizing any sort of evidence. Honestly, in their shoes, it probably makes sense. When liars are exposed, the last thing they want to do is have to provide a story or evidence, because if they do, they have to go deeper and deeper into a lie. This makes it way easier to call out and expose. So I understand why they don't want any sort of evidence, any sort of proof, or provide any sort of story, and also shame me for trying to. Finally, in a trio of made-up narratives, Alice and her accomplices would claim that I had an imaginary third ex, who I apparently dated after Alice. They claimed this imaginary ex didn't believe Alice at first, but then came onto her side, agreeing that I was abusive and manipulative, saying that I forced her to agree with me. First off, like I've stated so many times, my only two romantic partners are Alice and Delilah. I dated Delilah right after Alice, only a couple months, and so already the story stinks. It would turn out, in fact, that the person they claimed to be my ex was actually a former friend of ours, Ari, someone who me and Delilah met and became friends with, well into our relationship. Someone who, when she attempted suicide, me and Delilah would come to her house and console and make sure she was safe. Ari was actually the person who brought to light Alice's false rape claims, unprovoked by us, and she was the first one to actually stand with us against her, though she would then claim that I somehow forced her to do it. The reason Ari turned on us, and she even says so in her messages, was because when I was homeless and she was in a toxic home situation with her mom, we both agreed to become roommates and find a place for us and my little sister to live in, as me and my sister's mother had just abandoned us and we desperately needed a place to live. Sadly, our roommate plans would fall out because my brother moved up from down the hill and he needed a place immediately too, and he found one with just enough room for just our family. I apologized many times to Ari. I even offered her to take my bedroom until we found a place where she could live too, because I know she really needed to leave her house. But she denied, she resented us, she resented me, and she ghosted us for months. Now, she would apologize quite a few months later, but she would side with the more popular Benet when she made her claims that day, showing exactly where her care for people lies. In other words, when they post these as proof, they're saying that a support of a former friend that they claim was an ex of mine, even though she was not, who already turned on me before, is adequate proof that I am a terrible person that they describe me to be, even though this has no relation to Alice's story at all, to the one they're making up. It's literally no connection at all. It's someone that I almost lived with and then fell out and now they don't like me. I don't understand how that connects, but either way, we'll move on. One last related accusation of theirs I'd like to address is the fact that they claim that I'm a pedophile for dating Alice and my wife, who were both younger than me. Alice by 1 year and my wife by 2. When I was 18 with Alice and when I was 19 with my wife. They seriously are equating a year and 2 age gap between people dating to fully grown adult predators hurting and sexually abusing young children. Again, this is an example of how they're willing to delegitimize the pain of real victims in order to ruin my reputation. Real kids that get really hurt and live with it their entire lives, and they're using them as a tool to talk shit. Now, this is very disgusting. Very disgusting, because these two things are beyond incomparable, and they should be ashamed for doing so. But to be honest, this petty and childish attack is extremely true to their character. So I hope I've shown that none of what they are providing is the proof that they claim it to be. In fact, literally everything they post is just meaningful, hateful claims. And if anyone has noticed, even though Alice and her friends claim to be defenders of the scene, they have only been active in discrediting me and has not spread a single word of the multiple abusers and creeps that have been exposed with actual evidence and merit. Yet they attack bands like Izanami, who has been relentless in their driving out of all the abusers of this scene. And again, if they're trying to protect people based on their claims, the person in most danger would be my wife. But where were the messages warning her? Or trying to protect her, or anything at all? You know, anything. Instead, from the get-go, they have done nothing but insult and batter her with insults, because they don't care about justice or bettering the scene. They're just trying to use their privilege as popular white e-girls to falsely prosecute someone they resent, calling it justice. Reminiscent of the countless boys who were wrongly prosecuted with similarly baseless claims made by prejudiced white people. You need to go outside, Aaliyah. Going back again to when these recent attacks started again, it was all in response to a benefit show that me and my wife planned to do. It was in honor of George Floyd. We were deeply moved and heartbroken over the tragic unlawful death of Floyd served by the corrupt police force. And so we decided to do our part to make the change that we wanted to see in the world, doing what we can. Together we organized the event, the bands, the date, and picked the organization to donate to, that being the NAACP. That is when the Ball Pit reached out to us, offering to help by hosting the show in their venue. When the flyers were being spread, Alice and her friends would keep their heads back into the limelight, shifting the focus away from the cause. This is when the rape accusations came flooding in again, but this time with a twist. Taking advantage of the current climate and movement, Alice and her accomplices would now claim that I was a closeted racist bigot, as well as all the other things they claimed. And again, this is her and her friends taking advantage of real-world issues and evil in order to ruin the reputation of an ex. Now she cites again multiple sources of evidence of alleged racism. And just like before, there isn't any. She's only spreading around a 15-second Instagram story of me and my wife trekking through the snow in June. In said video, I refer to all those watching, that being my friends and followers, as my N-word. Now to anyone from the poor parts of Victorville, you already know how this word is used around here. It is by every race, by every color, with endearment. This is how all of us who grew up here know that word. And this is how I was using the word in that video. Now I understand, even with its colloquialisms, it's still not right for me to say, especially on my story. And that is why I removed the story from my highlights. And I want to apologize to any of those who were offended by it. Now, while I know for people like Alice and her friends, they can believe that not being racist is as simple as not saying a single word. While in actuality, it is a lot more complicated and in-depth. It is your views on other human beings, the actions you take, the ways you interact, and your philosophy and perception. Your acknowledgement of injustice and your desire for equality. Simply put, for all those who need to hear it, I believe all humans are of one family, all children of God to be loved. Take out the religious context if you like, and I tell you we all came from the same mother, genetically. And all of our differences are nothing but genetic evolutions of our ancestors, that our ancestors took to better adapt to their environment for thousands of years. And I believe to give any more significant than that is complete and utter ignorance. That is often fuel for tribalism and hate. I believe African Americans and all other people of color to still suffer from the lasting effects of racism in the form of systems and institutions put in place years ago that unfairly and inhumanely handicap. I believe it is our duty as fellow human beings to save and free our people from the oppression and ignorance and apathy of this world. Alice, when making these statements, is a complete and utter liar. And I believe she is projecting her own thoughts and feelings about race onto me. For example, she claims when we were dating while listening to Kendrick Lamar's 2017 album Damn, which was the first album I bought, I said, and quote from her description, "This is good, but he's still an N-word." Now, this is not only an almost comically ignorant statement that you expect from a Mountain Dew drinking, Confederate flag waving ingrate, but actually something probably very close to home for Alice, as she lives in and grew up in a home where you might expect this kind of language. You know, her father being racist, this is exactly the stuff you might hear from him. I mean, she even told me that he disliked me that way. He disliked the fact that we were dating because I was Mexican. And also, Kendrick Lamar is one of my favorite artists, like I said before. And that album was the very first album I bought. And that day I bought it, the CD, Alice was there. And what she bought that day was Nickelback's greatest hits. That's all I'm going to say about that. Now, moving on. Alice and her friends would serve not only to attempt and feel like they were in the right to use their lies and bullying to dismantle a benefit show thrown and hosted by people of color for the benefit of people of color, but then afterwards, even despite collectively raising over $2,000 for the NAACP with amazing help of the Ball Pit and the bands that played, they'd bully and harass all those there, including the bands and the Ball Pit owners who are people of color, calling them supporters of racism. It is so much more infuriating to have my people be bullied by so-called progressive women too privileged to see their problematic and regressive actions, when all we're trying to do is make the best change that we can and beat out all the hate that's in this world. But spiting your ex with false claims is way more important now, isn't it? As I always ask myself, how can you do this? Why would you do this? How can you not see how extremely disgusting this is? But I know exactly the kind of person you are. I know exactly what you're capable of. Person of your background, so used to toxicity, receiving and delivering, so used to hurt that all you know how to do is hurt others. You hate yourself, but you're the only person you care about, so you fill yourself with pity and victimhood, feeling your never-ending desire for attention. I was the only person who treated you right, and you did me so terribly wrong. And you know it, Alice. And you can't stand it. For once, you're the bad guy. And that's why you attacked me so much, telling me to kill myself, convincing yourself that I deserved it. And when people shunned you for your actions, you blamed me, deepening the resent into an obsession. You made sure to secure people that could never become my friend, because you were sure they'd judge you for what you did to me. And so for months, you tell mutuals and strangers malicious lies about my character. And for months you did this, until I caught wind and brought your lies to the light. And with it public, you're now faced with a choice of admitting your lies and being exposed as someone who lies about rape to spite an ex, or selfishly continue this facade, apathetic to all who are hurt by it. And a lot are hurt by it. But this choice was easy for you, wasn't it? Despite this, I don't hate you. I never have. Even with all this evil you're doing, I don't want anything but for this to stop. I think you're really sick, really mentally sick. And I think you need help, and I actually think you deserve help. And I beg you to do so. Get help. But this doesn't excuse your crimes. For what you did to all these good people, you must be held accountable. You need to own up to this terrible thing you've done and apologize. Not to me, no. You need to apologize to the people who attacked us because of your lies. To the ball pit owners and the bands, you need to apologize to Izanami, a band of real victims fighting to protect others. You need to apologize to my wife, who struggles as a woman you trampled on to push your lies. And more importantly, you need to apologize to all the real victims whose voice became harder to hear because you took up their airways out of spite. Whose struggle you use in malicious and selfish ways just as a tool to attack. The victims who may now be even more afraid to let their voice be heard because of your actions. You owe them all the truth and an apology. And that goes out to both Rayan and Benet as well as Alice. Now, to those who it matters to, this will be the last kind of thing I make of this. There won't be any more videos like this. Because our next step, our next course of action will be done legally. A restraining order, and if needed, even further action. Now, before I end this, I want to send a message to all the real victims of sexual abuse. Please, 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 don't let this dissuade you from going to the authorities or telling anybody. You need to get your story out there. If you need to, hit up a hotline, which I'll provide in the description below and even on the screen right now. Please, go to the authorities, get these persons arrested, get your story out there. And I'm sure it must be hard to provide evidence, but even if you go and make a statement, that's a paper trail that could lead to their arrest and lead to other people not being hurt. Please get healing, get justice, and live as best lives that you can despite whatever pain you go through. With that, I call this finished.